First up on today's show, I'm joined by my colleague Steve Moore from Washington, who joins us via Skype to talk about the politics and the economics of the Buffett Rule. Steve, welcome.
Hi, Mary.
So the president was in my home state of Florida talking up this great newish idea of his called the Buffett Rule. What is he actually proposing to do?
Well, the idea is to have a 30% tax on millionaires. So they would have to pay a minimum of 30% of their income in tax, Mary. What's interesting about this is that new numbers from the Treasury Department indicate that this will not raise very much revenue. It'll only raise about $5 billion a year. Now, $5 billion is a lot of money, but as you know, Mary, we're running about a $1.2 trillion deficit. So $5 billion is about 0.5% of the deficit. So the question that we asked the White House today in our editorial is where you're going to get the other 99% of the money we need to bring this deficit down. And the White House admitted in a press call this week that the objective isn't to raise revenue, Mary. It's not to bring down the deficit or debt. It's pure fairness and redistribution, and I really object to that as some kind of economic philosophy.
Steve, I want you to drill down a little bit. When you talk about fairness to whom and who determines what's fair?
Well, that's a great question, Mary, because the question I ask myself, and I've asked the Obama economists, is how is it fair to raise taxes in a way that won't raise any revenue? I mean, who is that fair to? Are we doing this purely to be punitive to the rich? And to some extent, I think the answer to that is yes. When I ask the Obama economists about this, all they talk about, Mary, is the maldistribution of income in America, and we've got to have a more equal distribution. Well, the way they want to create a more equal distribution is not to make the poor richer. They want to make the rich poorer. That's not a very good solution, but that really is, Mary, what their solution is to the problem that the rich have so much money, is to take it from them and give it to the poor. That is not an economic philosophy that has worked very well in any country that I've seen to create wealth.
I'm talking to my colleague Steve Moore on the Wall Street Journal editorial board about the Buffett Rule. Steve, didn't we already try this with something called the alternative minimum tax? And what did that achieve, and how has that evolved over the years?
Well, Mary, you're exactly right. Yeah, we already have a Buffett Rule. It's called the alternative minimum tax. I mean, almost all Americans are familiar with it because it snags so many of us now. This next year, unless we change the law, about 30 million Americans will have to pay the alternative minimum tax. That was a tax, Mary, that was supposed to just hit a handful of very rich billionaires when it was put into effect in 1969. It's just become a public nuisance. It hasn't raised a lot of money. It's only added complication to the tax system. And again, the question for the Obama folks is, why do we need a Buffett Rule if we already have an alternative minimum tax? And by the way, that tax is a failure. Why do you want to duplicate a failure?
Steve, in your opinion, how would rich individuals in America react if a Buffett Rule was indeed enacted?
Well, look, this violates one of the most important principles of supply-side economics, and I think good tax policy, Mary. You know this. You've been around the world. What countries are doing is lowering their tax rates to reduce penalties on work and investment and saving and entrepreneurship. I mean, you've seen that all over Asia. Even some of the European countries are trying to bring their tax rates down to attract capital, to attract human capital and physical and investment capital. I believe, Mary, if we put into effect this tax, which would, by the way, double our capital gains tax and dividend tax, you would see capital investment leaving the United States and moving to other countries, whether it's Germany or whether it's Italy or whether it's China and India. So this is going to help our neighbors, but it's not going to help Americans. It's going to actually make the outsourcing of jobs problem even worse.
Steve, let's talk about equality. We've got just about a minute left.
Yeah.
Let's assume that you buy the president's argument that the rich need to be taxed more in America because that would be quote unquote fair, regardless of who comes up with that definition. How progressive is our tax system today, and how much do the rich actually pay as it stands?
Well, there again, you nailed it, Mary. I mean, the top 1% are paying, as you know, I bet a lot of our readers and viewers of this show know this, 40% of the taxes now are paid by the top 1%. So for Barack Obama saying they're not paying enough, wait, 1 out of 100 pay 40%, and that's not enough? What does he want them to pay? 80% of the tax? I mean, we have a steeply progressive tax system. The top 10% pay 70% of the tax. So The idea that the rich aren't paying enough is not the problem. The problem, Mary, is we're not producing enough rich people.
Well,
we're not seeing incomes rise. And when incomes don't rise, you don't see the kind of tax revenue collections you need to balance the budget.